You may notice while watching this video that item descriptions are different than what was previously released on March 6th. This is because the version of the game we played is the very latest and will be very close to what is actually live when the game launches on March 22nd. We were recently invited by From Software to come check out their new action game, Sekiro Shadows Die Twice, at their studio in Tokyo, Japan, and the following are our impressions and commentary on the capture we gathered while we were there. Before we get into the gameplay, I want to note that the game does feature a substantial tutorial that we were not allowed to capture, so players will be introduced to the mechanics of the game very early, and there should be less confusion than in previous From Software titles. The beginning gameplay here is of Ashina Castle grounds. This may look familiar. This is the same level that was shown in the Tokyo Game Show and Gamescom demos. However, this time, you actually begin at the beginning of the level instead of somewhere in the middle, so you get to see kind of how substantial the level size is, and it is very large. One of the most interesting things I think is right off the bat, you have to decide to go left or right, down, up. There's nothing really telling you where to go. You sort of just have to figure it out. You can go wherever you can pretty much see, and it kind of gives this feeling of an open world almost. It's not quite that open worldy, but it feels very much like you have a lot of freedom to pick and choose how you and where you want to go. As you make your way around the map, you're going to run into these tough enemies, which we refer to as mini-bosses. Here's one example in General Naamori Kawarada. These enemies usually have 2 or more health bars. This is probably something you already knew. But what's really important about defeating them is that they give you important loot. In this case, we get a prayer bead and a gourd seed, which allows us to increase our Estus flask count by 1, if you will. And when you reach 4 prayer beads, you get to upgrade your vitality and posture, which is kind of like a permanent character upgrade. So when you see these enemies around the map, you want to make sure to defeat them because you're going to want this good loot. And if you don't, you're just going to have a tougher and tougher time the further on you get into the game if you skip them. One interesting thing that they've added to the game since previous demos is they've actually added this sort of fog wall that appears when you get to very tough enemies that doesn't allow you to skip them in order to progress. So sort of like Devil May Cry, the walls surround you and you have to fight and you can't leave until you fight. In this case, you can't. It's not that you can't go backward, but you can't progress. So the enemy ahead in this case, I have to defeat him in order to progress. I didn't know that when I got here because that's not how it was in previous demos, so I royally fuck it up badly. The next area we're going to be showing gameplay for is the Hirata Estate. This area is sort of a hidden area, quote-unquote, that you can teleport to once you receive a key item in the game. I won't go into spoilers on how you do that, but once you have it, you can port here and get some prosthetic tools and fight another boss. One of the extremely challenging things about Sekiro is that you often are outnumbered everywhere you go. Almost all the time, you're going to be fighting 2, 3, sometimes 4 or 5 guys at a time, or enemies, and it never feels like a fair fight. You have to be very creative in the way you face these situations because you are probably going to die if you just run straight in and YOLO it. I mean, if you're an amazing legendary player with legendary skill, maybe you can take it on, but for your average gamer, you're going to have to get a bit creative. As you can see, this entire area is just swarming with enemies, and one of the ways that you can be creative is using stealth. The game has a very, very high focus on stealth, much more so than any of the Dark Souls games or Bloodborne, and you really, really need to utilize this element in order to succeed. And one of the really interesting things about it is, should you be spotted like I am in this case, you can actually kind of slink off until the enemy sort of can't figure out where you are, much like Assassin's Creed, and then you can sort of wait and then go about picking enemies off one by one. Something that also sets Sekiro apart from the other From Software titles is that the world feels much more alive. There are lots of enemies that you can eavesdrop on and hear what they're saying. There are lots of NPCs around that talk to you through their houses, much like Bloodborne, or that just give you quests or information on what your objectives are. And there's just a lot more people and characters, and it feels more like an alive world than something you would see in a Souls game. The game features something of a world tendency in Dragon Rot, which is something which occurs when you die too many times in the game and resurrect, and it sort of spreads throughout the NPCs in the game, and it causes you to not be able to do their quest lines, even though you can still interact with them if they're vendors. Something interesting, though, is that you can actually gain a limited number of items in the game that will clear the Dragon Rot from the NPCs. So if you find that, you have a lot of them, you've died a lot of times, which is probably going to happen, You can clear them periodically so you can advance their quest lines, but I fully expect there to be a lot of confusion with these quest lines because of the added element of Dragon Rot, and it may have time-sensitive quest lines where you need to go here and then talk to the person, and if you can't advance it, then you may be stuck in that quest line. I'm not exactly sure, but I fully expect people to need the wiki for this particular thing because it's just going to be a lot of trial and error to see what it does and does not work. This fight here with the Shinobi Hunter Enshin of Misen was the hardest fight in the entire demo. The mini-bosses are extremely challenging, and I think players are going to die very much to them, maybe probably more so than any other mini-bosses in any other Souls games. They're that hard. And one thing that's particularly difficult is that unlike maybe Black Knights or something, you can't circle around behind them and hit them in the back or backstab them. It just doesn't happen like that with these quick enemies, and so you're facing them straight up, something like you would have to do in Nioh, and you're block, attack, jump, and one wrong move and you're dead. And there's no cheesing it. It's you really have to use the skills you've learned, and it's going to test even the most seasoned Soul veterans. Something different about Sekiro Shadows Die Twice is the skill trees that are implemented into the game. Players will have several different skill trees that they can spend points on from gaining experience from enemies, and they can sort of shape their character in the style of combat that they wish. Since skills are unlocked solely based on the experience that you gain, you can farm enemies over and over to gain experience in order to unlock skills. So this is something that you can very much progress at your own pace. If you want to go actively grind out some skills, you can. Or if you just kind of want to go along through the game and place points as you go, either way is totally fine. The last area we're going to showcase is the temple on Mount Congo. This area looks very different than previous areas that you've already seen, and has a much more green, autumny feel that you would traditionally see in Japan. There are parts of the game where stealth or just running through do play to your advantage. You can usually figure out what these are pretty easily. As you get more proficient at the game, you'll find yourself doing this more and more because you simply don't want to kill 15 enemies every time you go through one stretch, particularly if there's nothing to gain by doing so. This is actually one aspect of the game that has me slight concern because there are a few places that I played where I felt more compelled to just try and run through after, maybe that first or second attempt where I methodically made my way through the enemies and died on like the last guy of the area before I got to the next checkpoint. I felt myself compelled to just kind of like, okay, I don't want to fight 15, 16, 20 guys again to maybe die at the end, so I'm just going to try and run past as many of them as I can. Sometimes I made it, sometimes I didn't. But the fact that I felt more compelled to do that than go through the area, I think is probably one of the biggest negatives of the game, and I really wonder how that's going to play out in the long run. There are some enemies in the game that take health damage faster than they deplete their posture meter, and you're going to want to pay attention to these, because these enemies you want to be more aggressive with attacking, maybe not try and, deflect attacks as much, because it's just easier to chip away at their health. Now keep in mind that enemies that have less health also regenerate their posture slower, so it can work to your advantage should you be able to posture break them at some point as well. As many of you know, there are hidden doors in the game. This is one example of what they look like. They reveal hidden areas where you can find useful loot and other related things to the game. Not all of them will look just like this. Unfortunately, I don't know what the other ones will look like, but I have been told that they will not all look just like this one, and there are some variation. I think perhaps one of the most interesting things to me is that my general impression of the game has changed markedly since I first played at Gamescom last year, where I was thinking that Sekiro was more of a ninja Souls, if you will, but in reality Sekiro is very much its own game that's set apart from Souls in almost every way, and it's very unique in that regard. I think the addition of the posture meter or posture bar, whatever you like to call it, has really what's made the game distinct from these other From Software titles, because you're not just focusing on damage, and you're really trying to get that death blow, and it changes the entire way you play the game. I think Souls veterans out there, like myself, are really going to be surprised to find out how different the game is and how much they actually suck when they first start playing. There are so many differences that it reminds me a lot of when you first started playing Bloodborne, where it was kind of like Souls, but you had to learn the dodge mechanic and iframes and rally, except it's even less similar. So if you're going into the game as a Souls veteran and you're expecting to just know what to do because you've played From Software games before and you have a good education in From Software games, so to speak, I think you're in for a bit of a shock. Stealth plays a very large role in Sekiro, and it's not something that you really experienced much of in the Souls games or Bloodborne, because even though you could pick off an enemy or two here and there, it really wasn't the main focus of the game. And in Sekiro, it's a tool that you can use to really, turn the tables, because a lot of times you're extremely outnumbered by enemies, and if you don't thin them out first, you're in for a really rough go of it. One thing that I actually really enjoy about the stealth mechanic is that if you should fail in your stealthy assassin attempts, like I often do, you're not instantly dead. It's not over for you. You can fight your way out, because the combat mechanics are such a focal point of the gameplay that there is hope. And, sometimes you can get away with YOLOing it even when you shouldn't be able to if you play your cards right. There's been a lot of talk out there about the difficulty of Sekiro versus the Soulsborne games, and I definitely agree that it is more challenging than those games. I think primarily because you cannot summon other players to help you, you aren't left with something to fall back on if you cannot defeat bosses yourself. However, because the game is more challenging because you have to do it yourself, when you do succeed and you pull off some truly amazing ninja shit that you never thought you'd be able to do in a million years, it is so fucking satisfying. It is what pulls you into the game and makes you want to not stop playing. The things you can do in Sekiro, frankly, outshine the things you can do in the Souls series, because you have to elevate yourself to a whole nother level, and it really brings the best out in you as a player. Lastly, to diehard Souls fans out there that are disappointed that Sekiro is not a Souls game, I would say, I think there is more than enough there in Sekiro for it to stand on its own, and I know that it may not be exactly what you were asking for, but I think you will still enjoy it nonetheless. From Software deserves the benefit of the doubt here because, to be honest, even their worst games are extremely good. They just frankly don't make bad games, and it may not be Souls, but it's still goddamn good. Stay tuned for more Sekiro coverage, as we'll be publishing guides for the game, and be sure to check out the wiki for all your Sekiro needs, and don't forget to tune into Twitch, as we'll be streaming at launch.